How's everyone doing? I'm going to talk about a word that you've heard quite a bit. And let me just tell you, be at peace today. Know that you are loved radically by God. Know that you do belong. Know this, that you are not separated from God. What is separation from God? In the right context, and I'm going to tell you what separation from, I don't have time to teach this, but separation from God is simply this. It's believing the lie, buying into and being persuaded of the lie, the voice that tells you that you are already separated from God and that there's something you have to do to get yourself in. That is what it means to be separated from God. It is something that goes on in your subconscious, in our mind, something that we are taught in our society and that is innate. Now, you're not separated from God. You are at one with God. You say, why don't I feel like it? Well, maybe you need to hear this more often until something clicks with you that you are persuaded about a present truth that's already true. Here's the thing. When they believed that the world was flat, even though the world was round, there were limitations that they had because they believed a certain thing. And when new revelation surfaced for them and they were able to discover that the world is not flat, we're not going to get to the end of it and sail right off. When they discovered that the world was round, it changed their mindset. It changed the way they viewed now how they would sail. You need to understand this, that at one point, cell phones were not a thing. But what was a thing was mail that was carried either by a carrier that was on a horse or a pigeon or something that took a long time. And for the time being, that was how we communicated long distances. But when the telephone came into view, we now had to reorient and change the way we saw how we communicated long distance. Because before the telephone, before its invention, nobody could even see anything more than sending a letter. But when the telephone came into view, we now had to reorient and change the way we think about long distance communication. So there's a word that's scattered throughout the Bible. And I'm going to read this from the book of Romans, chapter 11. This is a really good chapter, but here we go. Verse 30. Or let me start verse 29. For God's bestowals of grace and vocation are not subject to a change of heart. Wow, you should hear that again. God's bestowals of grace and vocation are not subject to a change of heart. This means that, what it means, don't think that there has to be a change of heart before God bestows grace. This is who God is. For even as you once did not trust in God, but have now received mercy through their mistrust, so they now also have not trusted, to the end that by the mercy shown you, they now also might receive mercy. For God shut up everyone in obstinacy or disobedience, so that he might show mercy to everyone. You see what happened? God concluded and went ahead and just wrote the check that all are disobedient. Now, what does disobedience mean? It doesn't mean get your hand out of the cookie jar or don't you do this, like we've commonly thought. But here's what disobedience, when you look this word up in its context, it literally means this: to willfully not be persuaded by the voice. What is the voice of God? Who is the voice of God? Glad you asked. It says in Hebrews that God, who at different times and measures, and I'm paraphrasing this, spoke to us in time past by the law and the prophets, has in these days spoken to us through his son, Jesus. Jesus is the voice of God. Jesus is the voice of God. And the only people that had a problem receiving the goodness and how good God was and how kind God was. It wasn't the tax collectors and sinners. They wrote into the text, Jesus was a friend of the sinners, of the other people who were not Jews. That's what they wrote into the text about Jesus, who was a Jew himself. So what does all this mean? The Pharisees, they had a real problem with this. They had the idea that somebody's got to pay. Somebody's got to pay for this. You have to pay for your sin. And Jesus comes into your world, into humanity, to embrace your darkness. What is your darkness? Your darkness is believing in some way that you have been disconnected and separated from God. And Jesus came to reveal the reality of how much of a child of God you already are, how loved you already are, and how belonged you already are. Have a great day, and remember, you are loved.